It started with women talking and ended with a change in how you pay taxes. They're called the Kansas Women's Caucus, and some say these women could be the future of state politics. Who are they and how are they different from politics as usual? Those are just a few of the questions we're asking in this special edition of Kansas Week, starting right now. Welcome to Kansas Week. I'm Pilar Pedraza. Groups of politicians with similar concerns getting together to make things happen. That's a very basic definition of a caucus here in the state legislature. Not a new notion, but a new caucus in Kansas is making waves, and we're talking about it. Joining me today to tell you a little bit about the Women's Caucus, we have members Elizabeth Bishop, a Democrat from Wichita, and Anita Judd Jenkins, a Republican from Ark City, and of course John Shorman joining us from the Wichita Eagle. Thank you so much for joining us.
Glad to be
and
here.
As we look at all of this and how it happened, let's take a look at a little bit about what's going on. Just kind of give everybody a similar basis for understanding to see what we're talking about. It's called the Kansas Women's Caucus, a group of women legislators from across the political spectrum getting the work done in Topeka. They didn't exist when the 2017 session began, but as talk about tax reform got tough and then stalled out, they turned to each other for a solution. The women, many of them freshman lawmakers, say they started chatting. At first, just trying to understand what was going on. Then, as movement on the budget stalled, they went out to eat. They came back with flip charts and sticky notes of what could be done. By making lists, voting on priorities, and, most important, finding ways to compromise, this still-forming group came up with a plan that eventually helped drive tax legislation over the Kansas speed bumps. Now, of course, the final version of the tax bill that came through was not the one that you guys came up with, but my understanding is, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, is it really kind of spurred on the movement that did lead to the final version?
Yeah, so basically in the legislature there had been kind of a period of I guess you could call it butting heads and kind of inaction and gridlock for a period of days and weeks, specifically over taxes, but also over what to do with schools. And there had been a proposal debated on the House floor to essentially tie increase in school funding with a tax policy, and that had kind of after a kind of an emotional debate had failed. And you know, from my understanding, you know, the discussions regarding the Women's Caucus really kind of took root and started really picking up in the wake of that. And correct me if I'm wrong, but my sense was that that event kind of really ignited discussions among your group.
I'm going to correct you.
Okay. Go ahead.
Actually, this really is kind of the case in point, is so much of this was happening outside of what we were seeing.
Yeah, and I can only see some of it publicly, so I'm not privy to everything that happens privately.
It actually started a little bit earlier than that. There was a late Tuesday night, I think it was, vote on a tax plan. Sure. And it was close, and then it went down to defeat. And that was actually the spur. And first of all, let me just set the scene just a little bit. The state was in big trouble. We had been down, our bond ratings had been downgraded. We had lost any kind of reserve that the state ever had. We started out the year with a $300 million deficit, and something serious needed to be done. And we had this large group of freshmen. Anita Judd Jenkins here is a freshman. I'm a freshman.
Not anymore, you're not. You survived a session. You're no longer freshmen.
There was a large group of us, and we kind of bonded. We had a Democrat, Jim Gartner, and a Republican, Brenda Dietrich, who came together and as co-chairmen put our freshman caucus together. So we had bonded. Then things fell apart, and that one vote that Tuesday night was kind of the nexus, and we just, people started meeting. You get tapped on the shoulder and say, as soon as we adjourn, go to the vault. And there was this room there's a room in the Capitol called the vault, and we started out there. And the first thing, as I recall, Anita, was we had a discussion about social media. And we reached consensus quite quickly that we needed to stay off of social media for several reasons. For one thing, we wanted to figure out what we were going to do, and we didn't want to alarm anybody. And we also felt that there had been some snarkiness going on that we wanted to nip in the bud right away.
Yeah, that is kind of an ongoing problem with social media. Snark is out there.
We also realized very quickly that we were all in a learning process, not just as freshmen, but in understanding where we had been with tax issues and where we needed to be with tax issues. This year it was addressing the tax issues. Next year, we'll see. But the frank discussion that is available when you're in the vault with no windows, one door, closely watched, and not having it on anybody's agenda other than just, as you said, tapping on the shoulder of let's learn more, we were able to discover very quickly that we needed to learn a lot more. But we started by asking, why could you vote on this? Why did you not vote on this? What must you have in a tax plan in order to find consensus? What must not be in there? And through frank discussion, we had feelings hurt, people left, but in the end, everyone returned because we all had the common goal. And as it only took today 3 or 4, I think, of the discussions in between having session, that we knew that we wanted help greater than our little group. So that's when we started inviting in the tax chair, inviting in men from the chamber, inviting those that could give us answers to our questions. And from there, it mushroomed into, by the time it was over, we had representatives, senators, men, women, standing room only.
And I think, John, for me at least, the first time I heard about it, it was actually from Stephen Johnson, the tax chair in the House. He said, you need to know about this. This is kind of going on here. They've got something happening over there. When did you first hear about it?
I'm trying to remember exactly when, but I have a similar story as you. As the members of this group were not going around, and you mentioned social media. They were not going around promoting that we're all meeting to come up with some grand scheme or idea. That was not the case at all. This
we
was
didn't
very
start
much
out thinking we were going to be doing it.
This is very much a quiet effort, and I think that's why it kind of flew under the radar for as long as it did. And you have to wonder, if I or some other reporter had found out about it earlier. Honestly, if it had been exposed earlier, would that cohesion have held, or would things have splintered? It's impossible to tell, but in this case, they were able to reach a consensus and kind of come to a solution.
Yeah. One of the things that once we kind of vented and began to understand why so-and-so voted the way she did, or why this person couldn't possibly have voted for that bill, and talked about our different districts for one thing, that which is very interesting to hear. Once we've been through all that, then we came up with the question, well, what do we want? Because a significant number of us are not happy with what's been offered so far. What would we accept? And that's when we basically decided to write our own tax plan. And we went out and got the big sheets of paper and the sticky notes and so forth. And we did vote, remember, Anita, with the sticky notes?
With the sticky notes only, yes. And how would it, when we started making charts on the walls, if you have to have this issue addressed in order to vote, and this, and everyone gave their opinions, and some of them were a rate, some of them were like child care credits or Homestead Act, different issues, medical expense deductions. We ended up with a full chart of all of the things people said were important to them or to their district and their constituents.
Then we had to find out how much each thing cost.
Yeah.
And that's where the education came in, and it was a wonderful education. That's when we invited in Steve Johnson and Tom Sawyer, and they went, and staff, and they went through all of it with us, and we began to put amounts there, and then we came up with the total. And then we went to the rates last.
I've got to say that as somebody who studied government for years, certified to teach in the state of Kansas, to me, this was the essence. What you're describing is the essence of what I interpret as the Founding Fathers' idea of the way government should run in the United States. Very practical, very much, let's sit down and figure out what needs to be done. Did this kind of jive for both of you, I need to start with you, with what you were expecting out of a State House experience?
Yes, it was. I guess it's quite humbling to discover that I can be naive at this age, because when I arrived, I was surprised that the legislative process does not have opportunity to learn outside of your own caucus or the amendments of discussion on the floor, which is minimal in comparison to what should be the learning experience. So by us taking this to the vault, we were able to better expose all of us to the knowledge that we needed to arrive at a conclusion and an understanding where we could make consensus. We all knew that we weren't going to have everything we wanted, but that's okay. My generation grew up, at least from my home, that government is everyone's voice at the table, find consensus, and do for the good of all. I thought I would arrive at the State House and have that experience. It wasn't necessarily true.
Well, I know John Wayne, I've talked with political scientists before. That's often been the comment that that was Kansas politics up until about 8 to 10 years ago.
Yeah, and the only other time I can recall seeing these kind of groups meet like this was in 2015 during another kind of gridlock scenario involving taxes. But in that case, you had a lot of groups really dividing and meeting based on ideology and similar ideology, whereas here, the difference here was this was cross-partisan, and it was kind of, you know, come as you are and let's kind of start to try to meet in the middle. I would be curious if I could ask a question. To what extent was the leadership in both parties kind of aware of what you all were doing, and you know, how did they feel about that? Were they worried that they were losing control of the process, or did they have your blessing? Were they giving their blessing to meet? I guess I'd be kind of curious the extent to maybe they were involved, if you can discuss that.
Let me mention first of all that the nexus of this was an idea that was from Cindy Holscher, who called Stephanie Clayton. And the two of them were the first two that met, and then it grew from there. And I believe that leadership on the Democratic side was fairly okay with it. I think there was a little bit of nervousness about, you know, well, what are you girls up to? But other than that, I do know that, and I know this happened on the Republican side as well, as we got down closer to the wire, we called it being called into the principal's office. We did get, you know, groups of us were to go meet with leadership and so forth. I did not find that meeting troubling at all. I felt encouraged that we were on the right track, maybe not there, maybe not perfect. And there was a lot of discussion in the group. Do we want the perfect to be the perfect to be the enemy of the good? But on our side, I thought it was very positive, and that was true in the caucus. Usually, I don't know if this is supposed to be secret or not, but at the end of our caucus, as we walk out, we say, vote your district, vote your conscience.
a very egalitarian phrase there, is certainly that reaction, the positive reaction is mostly what I've heard. And as we've heard more and more about it, all of the activity coming from the Still Infant Caucus not only got statewide attention, but some national kudos as well. Word first began to break about the new caucus late in the session. Several state papers published stories profiling the women's group over the following days. Then, after the final vote on Kansas tax overhaul, the Women's Caucus got national attention. The Huffington Post picked up on the story, writing the Women's Caucus was, quote, pivotal to Kansas' new tax laws. The article profiled how the women had mostly kept quiet about their efforts, even as membership grew to include senators and committee chairs, with members finding ways to win over desperately needed votes to get a veto-proof majority on the crucial bill. I mean, even this show here right now, I know State House Blend on KCUR in the Kansas City area did, I think, a half-hour special on it as well. Lots of attention. Has that taken you ladies by surprise?
Not really. You asked Anita if she found things to be the way she expected them to be. They're pretty much the way I expected them to be because I have a little bit of a background as far as legislation is concerned. So the mechanics were what I expected. Yeah. I was not expecting the stalemate. I was not expecting the difficulty and the fact that we just couldn't get past it. I think that was I don't know that we were pivotal, but I think we were very positive in the whole process. And that blending us back together again so that we created that voting block was extremely important.
Yeah. Well, and I would say that from what I heard from others, that the work that you ladies did within the Women's Caucus was actually very crucial to what ended up happening. Certainly a lot of the ideas that you came up with ended up being what passed and what got the votes needed to pass the bill.
I think that was the crucial part, is the learning process of the group that had formed, that continued to get larger in number, men and women, was understanding so that, and feeling they had a voice so that they could come together and have a secure number for a vote that would hold. As far as, did I expect the attention? That was never the intent. The intent was to do the work. I think all of us ended up being very pleased that there was some recognition that we were willing to do the work. Beyond that, I'm flattered that, because I thought that's what every job I've done, and that we should do.
I hope we created a model.
Yes, we've set the bar high.
You certainly have. You certainly have, certainly with my experience.
Well, that, I mean, like you just mentioned, that certainly raises the question of, is this something that can apply to this coming session, where I think everyone expects school finance to be the big topic. You know, I guess, is this a group that can kind of transcend various issues? You know, move from taxes on to potentially school finance, and I mean, what are the? It seems like you're shaking your head. Yes.
You're stealing a march on me here. Which just goes to show that we're both journalists and we think the same, which is the idea of what does come next. You know, members of the Kansas Women's Caucus aren't willing to rest on their laurels. The question is, as we've said, what is next? With the hard work of the 2017 session behind them and their group now publicly recognized, the Kansas Women's Caucus must look forward. During the legislative break, caucus members attended public forums, did newspaper, radio, and TV interviews, sharing their story and hearing from you. While members have no concrete plans for the 2018 session, they say they're sure the Women's Caucus will get back to work. While in-person meetings may be difficult when members are busy at the beginning of the session, they've got an active online community going now to help stay in contact. And they say it is quite likely they will once again decide to tackle another major policy initiative. Certainly, the legislature faces enough of them. So, as we've said, plenty of legislative issues that are going to be huge this next session. School funding has been one that's been in the headlines a lot lately. Are there any, as you're covering the State House, that are kind of developing that may take precedence, or I guess nothing's going to take precedence over school finance, but maybe be as big?
Well, I think certainly the school finance issue has the potential to turn into a tax issue, especially if the decision is made that there is a significant increase in funding needed right away.
No.
That obviously.
I'm not laughing at the idea of it turning into a tax issue. I'm laughing at the faces I'm seeing here at the idea of having to face another tax issue year.
It's not fun. It was not fun the first time around. It certainly.
But we're Pollyannas.
Could I say, Pilar, one of the things that I think we will take with us into the next session is that we have, to some extent, bonded. We have learned about one another. We've shared a lot. We speak truth to each other. And I think that will come in good stead when we hit other impasses that we need to get over.
Wow.
I think leadership from both parties recognize our will to learn more in depth about the issues. That is a positive thing. So hopefully they will join us in that process.
And certainly from the conversations I've had, not with all of them, but with a couple folks in leadership, that seems like it's to be very likely. I've heard nothing but positive from leadership about the Women's Caucus. What about you, John?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone pretty universally agrees now that it was a good idea and it was something that produced a good result. I'd be curious if any of just the journalist in me has to be a little bit skeptical and ask, you know, are the strains of a re-election year going to strain any of that relationship at all and complicate things? I don't know the answer to that. The answer would be up to them, obviously.
I think there's a difference between politicking and governing. And what the Women's Caucus is about is governing. I hope that the strains of politics, re-election campaigns, and so forth won't make us lose our focus. I am absolutely confident it will not strain our relationships.
I agree. I feel very strongly that, like you said, the difference between governors, we're governing, we are going to stay on task because all of us, whether you have been an incumbent for a dozen years or whether you're new, know that House of Representatives is a 2-year cycle. There's never a guarantee. And I do believe that the freshmen particularly came in knowing this is not a career step. I certainly have never viewed this as a career step. I'm going nowhere other than to serve my constituents. That sense I have from all of the other freshmen. That's a good thing.
Well, and we were talking when you guys came in, you hadn't gotten here yet, John, about some of the issues that you're already facing with the re-election campaign, and there being some movement against all of the members, really, of the Women's Caucus and everyone else who voted for the tax overhaul by, what was the group again that we were talking about?
Americans for Prosperity.
Thank you, Americans for Prosperity. I always get the names flipped with a couple of other groups, and
there's a bunch of them.
Exactly. But already an active movement against both of you and the others who voted for that tax overhaul. So really kind of facing some of the same political attacks and strains at this point.
That's something we share.
No. So as you look at what's next, you know, this session is going to be as bad, if not worse. I hate to say this for you ladies, but as bad, if not worse, than last year's with everything that's facing us. You talked about having the online community set up so you can communicate. Have you talked at all about plans for meetings or plans for discussions for this next session?
I have received nothing thus far.
There have been ideas floated and dates could not be selected because everybody was going on vacations and work-related things, you know, that people pick back up. So it's hard, and I know that at the start of the session, I know people may not believe this, but we go from morning to night. I mean, right through meals and everything, because we frequently have caucus meetings of various kinds over the lunch hour where we're learning about issues, and they're working lunches quite frequently, and sometimes even at dinner time, and sometimes breakfast. So it's hard.
Excuse me, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
During the first part of the session, we are in committees learning from stakeholders, agencies, budgetary concerns, etc. So that is the structure of government. It is not until bills start to rise out of committees that there seems to be the need, because there is not a fractioning until you start to see what's developing in the bill. At that time, I feel that we will
We'll be consulting more.
Yes, we will have the opportunity to work together again. When you said earlier that it was such a bad year, and you can't imagine us going back into it again, I disagree. I thought it was a great year. I thought it was my only.
You did say you were Pollyanna, and I've got to say I'm a negative Nancy.
I thought it was a fantastic year, and I look forward to the process again.
All right. So very quickly, John, last question. What is it that makes this caucus different from all of the other caucuses that you and I see up there?
Putting politics behind the policy. I think most caucuses would say that they do that, but there's a difference between practicing it and preaching it, and you know, they did both.
All right, they practiced what they preached. All right, thank you, ladies. And John, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate this conversation. It's been very fascinating. I wish we had more time. And I hope that you've enjoyed it as well. You can continue the conversation, or if you have questions for us about the Women's Caucus, you can email us at kansasweek@kpts.org, or you can find me on Twitter, Pilar Pedraza TV, and I'll tweet away. I'll respond. For now, have a great week.